Hi, Nick from Old Fashioned Nights, and today I'm going to make a removable outfeed table for my table saw. So I mentioned I want to make a removable outfeed table. And the reason for that is I got a small basement shop here, so I don't have a lot of room to work with. I also have my saw on this saw stand, which I'll take up the stairs and bring it outside when it's warm out and I need to cut. So I don't want something permanently fixed to the table saw or some large kind of fixture. So I want something that is relatively small. I can add in, take off fairly easy, and just something that I don't have to do any sort of modifications to my table saw, whether it's drilling into the frame, attaching screws anywhere. I want to try to avoid that. In another one of my videos, I have an infeed table that I made that basically slides into the brackets of my saw stand, and then I just lock it in with some star handles, and that does a pretty good job of holding it in. So I really like that design. It's short, compact, so I want to reuse it for my outfeed table. In that video, I basically had the infeed table already created, so I was just kind of going over my design and showing what I got. So for the outfeed table, I really want to go from beginning to end. Now, most of my projects I have laid out in SketchUp, already drawn out, but this one I'm kind of going into it a little raw. I don't have anything fully designed. I have an outline of a design I want to use, which is my infeed table. So I want to, for this video, kind of go into my whole thought process as I'm going through it, as well as building it up. And so you can kind of hear my thoughts and concerns. Again, I have a rough idea of what it looks like in my head, but I don't have anything on paper, so stuff may come up. For my infeed table, it's relatively short. I think it's about 12 inches in the front. But for my outfeed table, I'd like it a little larger, at least 2 feet, maybe even longer. Just that extra space after the tables, after the saw when you cut material, just to rest on. So with that being so much longer, is there going to be a torque or a moment that causes it to tilt? So how am I going to correct that? It's just something I'm going to come up with on the way and see what works out. All right, here we are at the back of my table saw. Now, what I found in building my infeed table, it was easier to build from the base up. So I'm going to do the same thing here with the outfeed table. And I mentioned that I wanted to use my saw stand brackets to secure my outfeed table to. So what I'm first going to do is get the dimensions for the openings. So here I have 1 1/4 by 2 1/4. And for their length, I'm going to see what 2 feet looks like. Now, it's not going to be measured from the opening. I'm going to put it as far into the bracket as I can, which I'm kind of limited by the handle of the saw stand bracket. So here I have 2 feet, and I think that's a pretty good length. So I'm going to stick with that. Now for my stock that I'm going to put into these saw stand brackets, for my infeed table, I took a 2x4 and squared it up. I found that took a little bit of time, a little bit of work. So I'm going to try something different for the outfeed table. I'm going to take a couple of 1x3 boards and glue them together and cut them to the dimensions I need. We'll see how that works out. So let's get to cutting. I got my boards cut to the rough length. I got glue, I got clamps. Let's glue them together. So what I'm first going to do is take one of my boards, set it down, and take my glue and just run it along the length of it. And then take my glue brush here and just
smear the glue everywhere. So I'm just trying to get a nice even plane of glue on the board. Not too much, but I want to cover the whole board to make sure I have enough bonding power to the other piece of wood. Okay. Set this off to the side. See, it's got a nice layer of glue on it. And what I'm going to do next is take the second board, and I'm just going to place it on there and clamp it together. Now, it doesn't matter that I'm perfectly lined up on the edges if it's a little off, because what I'm going to do once it's dry is take it to my table saw with a joiner sled, and I'm going to square this up. But I'm going to try to get it as close as I can right now. So I'm just going to set her on there, take my clamps, take one clamp here, put it on the edge, and just lightly tighten it, just lightly at first. And then I'm going to take a couple of scrap pieces of wood, place it in the middle, and those are just to provide extra surface area for my clamps to secure it. And I'll take a couple of these quick clamps. Again, light pressure right now. Secure it like so. And then take another one of my clamps and place it on the edge. And now what I'm going to do is start tightening everything down. So each clamp, I'm just going to go little by little. And there you go. Now I'm just going to go ahead and wipe off any excess glue, and I'm going to repeat the same steps for the remaining pieces of wood. Gone and let the boards dry overnight, remove them from the clamps, and now I have my two boards glued together. So I've gone ahead and glued some additional boards. So later in the project, I'll go ahead and use those additional boards for my vertical support posts. But right now, I'm going to take these glued boards and I'm going to place them on my joiner sled. So what the joiner sled will do is I'll place my stock on this side here. I'll reference this side of the joiner sled on my table saw fence, run it through, so I'll get a nice straight cut on the one side. I'll then take that board off the joiner sled with the straight side, and then I'll flip it around so that straight side now references the table saw fence, and then cut the board to the height I need. That'll give me the two parallel faces that I need. So let's go ahead and do that. So I got my joiner sled ready to go, and I mentioned that I had 1x3 stock or 1x3 boards. It's actually 1x4, but that doesn't matter. So what I'm going to do is set my joiner sled at 3 inches on this side. Doesn't really matter because I'm referencing my table saw fence off of this side. It's just I like to get it somewhat relatively straight on here. So let's get this locked in at 3 inches from the edge here. And then I'm going to take my clamps, put those about here. And then I'm going to take my piece and I'm going to joint this side. So I'm going to place the stock on here
there's a little bracket on the end here. I don't know if that's coming through right here. And that's where the board will rest up against on the back side. That kind of helps when you're pushing it through, just to make sure there's something supporting it on the back. So I'm going to take my board, place it along this side as well as the back here. And then I'm going to go ahead and just clamp it down enough to hold the piece in place. Now, this joiner sled, its limit is probably this 1.5 inch stock or thickness that I have. So I'm kind of pushing it to its limit, but I still have enough threads to hold it in place. All right, tightening it here. It should be good. So I'm secured on here. Now I'm going to go ahead and take this to my table saw, and I'm going to joint the one end. So the first thing I want to do when joining is I'm going to place my joiner sled here, going to unlock the table saw fence, and what saws off, blades down, I'm going to take the side that references the fence, place it on my fence, and then slide the fence back until I begin to have the blade go over the overhanging stock that I'm going to joint. So that should be good right there. I'm going to go ahead and lock my fence, flip it around, and raise my blade to the height I need. And that's good right about there, just slightly overhanging or sitting above the board. So that should be good. And I'm just going to do one last check. The fence locked here. The joiner sled referencing the fence. Run it through, and I catch the blade. And I can see that I will go ahead and run that blade the length of the piece. So let's go ahead and joint it then.
just a reminder, if you like this content, please go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow, and it lets me know that people like what I'm doing. And if you got comments, ideas, or anything, go ahead and put in the chat, and I'll try to get to it as best as I can. Now let's get back to building. I got my 2 bracket pieces cut to the length, width, and height that I need, but I still can't fit it in there just yet. Currently, there is nuts and bolts into this bracket that's preventing it from going any further. There's a bottom set for some feet on the bracket, as well as a top set that actually holds the table saw to the bracket. Now, I could remove the bottom set, but I'm for sure going to need the top set because I obviously need to hold my table saw to my bracket. And as I mentioned, I don't want to do a bunch of modifications. So I'm still going to leave the hardware for these little feet on the bottom the way they are. Never going to use them, but just in case. And it kind of holds the bracket on the bottom together. So what I'm going to do is create some openings in my stock here to allow it to slide in. Now, just like anything, there's multiple ways you can do it. So I'm going to do 2 different methods here. For the bottom nut and bolt, I'm going to create a channel with my table saw. And for the top nut and bolt, I'm just going to create an opening with my my router table. So I'm going to get some dimensions here, and I'm going to go ahead and create those openings. The height for my nut and bolt on the bottom was about 1/4 inch. So I'm actually going to go above that, and I'm going to set my blade height to 0.35 inches to make sure I clear that. That's good. Now I'm going to go ahead and set my fence to the distance I need. with the bracket supports done, I'm going to do my cross supports, and I'm going to have 2 cross supports. I'll have one on the end and then one somewhere in the middle. I haven't decided yet, but I know for sure I'm going to have 2 pieces that are going to be cut the same length. So I'm going to go ahead and get my dimensions and get the pieces cut. Now I'm going to take my level here and secure it to the table saw table. And then with the level secured, I know that that's basically where my table saw plane is extending out. I'm going to go ahead and get the distance from here as well as from here. Now that's not the distance that or the length of the pieces that I'm cutting, because I'm going to have to subtract the stock for my plywood that I'm using, which is 3/4 inches. So I'll get these 2 lengths, subtract 3/4, and then I'll cut the vertical supports. We got both sets of our vertical supports cut. So what I'm going to do is just a quick little test fit up just to see that everything is good. So I'll take my front pieces, my front vertical supports, just place it really anywhere on the bracket pieces, and then my back ones, and I'll just place it over here on the board. And then what I'll do
is take the plywood top that I'm going to use. I'm going to just set it on these pieces like so. Take my level, place it on the table saw table, and as you can see right here, it's nice and in line with the table saw table. You do notice that there is a gap back here, and that's kind of what I was thinking with the way of the table. It's kind of pulling it down, so if I just pull it up a little bit, we're fine. So that's something that we'll have to look at, adding some way to at least support it more in the back. We'll worry about that later. But yeah, so for now, the vertical supports are good, and I'm going to look at how to secure or where to secure these vertical supports nearest the table saw. For my vertical supports nearest the table saw, what I want to do is utilize them to be kind of a depth stop to prevent it from going in any further. I did the same concept on my in-feed table. So you can see that I have those, so when I slide it in, it won't go any further than that vertical support. It hits the bracket. The one thing that I'm seeing already is if I go ahead, take my vertical support, butt it up against that bracket, that when I go to install my threaded handle, that everything's going to be real tight. And what I'm going to do is probably end up either hitting the bracket on the saw stand itself, or I'll constantly run into just interference with that vertical support. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take some scrap wood that I have cut up the same width and length, or width and height of these posts here, and I'm going to cut it about 1/2 inch high, and then that'll give me my 1/2 inch height. So I'll have that space off. I'll have a 1/2 inch high piece right there, and that should give me enough room to install my threaded handle without actually running interference anywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and cut those two pieces about 1/2 inch high and then get them secured. What I also noticed is I had the piece here contacting this handle. I want to try to avoid that. So I've gone ahead and backed it up just a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead, make a line here on the piece. And then when I take this out to install my pieces, I'm going to figure out what the distance from this line to that end there and duplicate over there so everything's nice and lined up. While the vertical supports nearest the table saw are drying, I'm going to install my threaded handles. So I got these insert nuts that will have the threaded insert go into it. So I need to get this into here.
So I'd gone ahead with a pencil and traced out the outlines of the opening for the bracket I had. And I found that looking at it, if I were to make my center point a 1/4 inch off of that line, that should give me enough room for these threaded inserts. So I'm going ahead and marking a 1/4 inch off of the end, or 1/4 inch off of the opening end, and I'm going to take my spring-loaded punch and then just do a starter point right about the center there. And then do the same on the other side. If I thought ahead, I maybe would have done this with a drill press, but with how everything is, I couldn't easily get a drill press on there. But the hole looks good, so I'm going to take this threaded nut here, put it in the hole, and it also came with this Allen key, this hex key, that I'm going to use to drive it into the hole I just drilled. So let's go ahead and start it. Just happen the spacing between my vertical support is enough where I can easily spin that around. I'm contacting it just a little bit. And I want to drive it so the head sits right at the level of the wood or just a little bit below. Clean up the excess wood. Just a little tighter. There you go. All right, so let's take this. All right, that looks good. Let's go see how it looks on the table. All right, plenty of room. Not running interference on anything. That looks good. Now let's work on these back two vertical supports. For my back supports, I kind of have to be careful where I place them. So if I put my back support here, and then I've taken my joiner sled's track, and let's line it up with my table saw, and I extend it out because I want to do that groove on my outfeed table, and how I want to secure the tabletop of my outfeed table, I want to drive some screws into those supports, and how I have it right here, I'm running it through the channel. So just to make things a little easier and not have to do extra work, I just want to make sure that where I put these back vertical supports won't be where the channels are above or below. So we'll do that to this piece here. That should be good right there. So I'm going to go ahead, mark these locations with a pencil, and then I'm going to put some pocket holes and then get it secured. Now before we go ahead and put the top on, I gotta get that last cross piece in. So here I just did a test fit where I put it in right after those two front vertical supports. And what I'm looking for is to make sure that I'm not going to interfere with anything. So the only real thing that I could have interference on is my dust collection. But if I go ahead, put that there, it really doesn't interfere with anything. So I'm going to go ahead, put some glue, and get those pocket holes driven in.
Now it's time to figure out where exactly I'm going to place that outfeed table. So what I'm going to do is take my outfeed table and just place it on like so. This is a 2x2 sheet of plywood, birch plywood, 3/4 inch thick. And what I've done is put my saw on my table saw, or my fence on my table saw, and I just want to make sure that it's not going to obstruct anywhere with my placement. So what I've done is figured out that if I take one of my 1.25 inch pieces, as well as this 3/4 inch board, place it like so, and have it butt up against the end of the table. If I move that along like so, it's nice and uniform. And that's going to be my placement. And just double check no interference with the table saw fence. That's good. So I have it where I would like it. Now what I have to do is just go on the bottom side, and I'm just going to trace an outline of those 4 vertical posts, the 2 close ones as well as the 2 far ones. Then with those traced, I'll go ahead, flip it around, drill pilot holes into each of those 4, 2 pilot holes in each of those 4. And then so that way I can see where I'm driving in my screws, and I'll assemble it that way, put some glue on it. And once that's done, I'll go ahead and I'll run my channels. With the outfeed basically done, all I have left is to route the miter slots or the channels. But before I do that, I mentioned that the table kind of starts to dip at the end, and that's with its own weight. So I imagine once I get some stock on there, it's going to drop it down lower. So I wanted to create a leg to give some more support on the back. I started thinking there's multiple ways you can do it, right? I thought of maybe a couple of boards with channel or slots in there that I could slide out and down, but there was no practical location on the outfeed table to do it. I then thought, maybe I'll do a couple of legs and some hinges, but the thing with hinges, I always worry about a pinch point with maybe I'm putting it in there and it swings down, I pinch my hand, and I know that's going to make me upset, and if that happens, I'm going to regret doing it. So I wanted to do something different. Now, when I bought my T handles, it came in a 5-pack. So I had 2 on the infeed, 2 now on the outfeed, so I had 1 left over. So I figured, I'll go ahead and utilize that.
I also had all that leftover wood from building the outfeed table, so I also wanted to use that. And again, I wanted something fairly simple. So this is what I came up with. It's basically just a little stand that slides under the outfeed table. I have a couple of boards on the bottom of it that guide it in. I also have this piece of board on top to stop, so I could slide it in. It gets to the depth that I need. I then have a threaded insert nut on the bottom of the outfeed table, and then I just take my threaded T-handle and slide it under and tighten it, and then it holds the outfeed table. So I have 45 pounds on there. It's still level with my table saw table. So I think that does a really good job of holding it. And I don't imagine I'd have 45 pounds of stock on my outfeed table, but there it is. Now for my miter slots, I'm basically going to take a level, secure it to my table saw table as well as my outfeed table, and take my palm router and basically just route out the miter slot into the outfeed table. So for my table, my miter slot is 3/4 of an inch. So I got my palm router with a 3/4 inch straight bit. And what I'm going to do is basically just do small passes until I get the depth that I need. So the first pass will be 1/8 of an inch, and I'll keep going in increments of 1/8 of an inch until I get to the depth, which for my table is 4/10 of an inch. So first I want to get the level or my guide secured to my table saw. So I'm going to do that. I got my 1/8 inch cutting depth, no battery. I'm going to go ahead and place that into the miter slot of the table saw. And I'm going to butt up my level to my palm router. And then I'm just going to secure it at that end. Now I'm going to take it to the near end here and do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and tighten it on the outfeed table side as well. Okay, it should be nice and straight. So I'm going to go ahead and do my first pass and then keep doing passes at 1/8 of an inch until I get to the 4/10 of an inch that I need. I have now done routing my miter slots on my outfeed table. I could run a track through each side just fine on the table saw. There's no interference, but I did run into a couple of issues when I was routing out my miter slots. We'll start on this side here. Now, I initially mentioned that I wanted to do 1/8 inch passes, so I did my first pass just fine. And when I went to do my second pass, it should have been 1/4 of an inch. But what I think I ended up doing was taking 1/4 and adding it to 1/8, which gave me 3/8 of an inch. So it was a lot larger than I would have liked. So when I went ahead and started routing my second pass, I could tell that my palm router was bogging down a little bit. I could tell there was something wrong. And my mistake was I should have just stopped where I was as soon as I noticed something was off and try to figure out what happened. But I stubbornly went ahead with it. And what I ended up doing was the router pulled on me. I got this weird looking feature into my table. Now, it doesn't affect anything from an operations standpoint. I can still run my miter track through it. It doesn't catch on it. It just looks funny. So maybe in a future video, I'll go ahead and show how to maybe fix something like this. So that was that side. And then on this side, I made sure I was doing 1/8-inch passes each time, but I was just having a tough time. It just seemed like, I don't know if it was a combination of my palm router not being powerful enough, the 3/4-inch straight bit just being kind of dull, or like I said, maybe a combination of both of those. But it just was having a tough time. It was just fighting me. It seemed like it was fighting me the whole way routing this one side. But I ended up getting through it. And then another thing I noticed was for my table saw, the miter slots on that aren't exactly 3/4 of an inch. It's a little larger. So to get that little larger than a 3/4 inch width for these miter slots on my outfeed table, I kept my level where it was, and I took a steel ruler and then added it to my level and ran my router along that. So that just kind of offset it about 1/8 of an inch. So with that, I got my widths for my miter slots exactly where I needed them. And basically the outfeed table is done. So let's go ahead and test her out. So that's my video from my outfeed table. If you like this content, please go ahead and hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. And I'll see you in the next video.